we may finally have gotten the upper hand over Lepidus. Even the Numidians were getting involved, all thanks to our strengthened naval power. But those ships of ours had reached their limited usability here in Hispania. Apart from his most powerful city, all of Lepidus' holdings were inland and protected by armies. We may have allies nearby, but they weren't really in a cooperative mood. We only had 2 armies to take down an entire Roman faction, a former member of the Second Triumvirate. Uniting our 2 armies was of utmost importance, but doing that wasn't as easy as it may sound, mainly because of the eastern coast. This was where the weaker one of our 2 legions held up. I couldn't move it along the southern route, as that would leave Tarraco and Ars exposed. Yeah, and going for Numantia or Iplaceia with a single legion would be a death sentence. So for now it would just sit here outside of Mastia and outside of our enemy's reach, strengthening the army and trying to figure out what to do. At least over here we had intel about our enemies to work with. But down in Libya that wasn't really the case. Octavian and the Prima Italica Legion was exposed in Carene and had already repelled one attack without knowing whether another one was around the corner or eons in the making. From here we didn't even have the reach to defend Africa. The Egyptian witch Cleopatra held sway over Argila to the south and could easily walk around Carene straight into our provinces before Octavian could react if she decided to do so. Taking Carene in the past was a quick fix to a pumping wound that now started to fester. Let's be fair, it did seem unlikely that the Egyptians would attack considering how the cowardly admirals consistently fled from our ships every time we tried to instigate a fight. But you know what? If they didn't want to engage our fleet, and as their lands were mostly based around the coast, we might as well use our ships to scout with. And oh Jupiter have mercy, I was lucky to have done that. Every stride we made revealed another army at full strength, or at least about to be. Most likely they were aiming at Octavian, the spearhead of our entire operation, while already having an army raiding us. Oh, and we also discovered Cleo, who was patrolling her way south on her way to exploit our vulnerability. Now that you are up to speed on the dangers we are in down here, let's look at greater tidings elsewhere. Let's say in Illyria, where the Cisalpine Legion had made its way to Iadaea and was about to slide its way through Illyria in the most mindless conquest of a rival ever. Was Mark Antony really this weak and placed all his marbles on that fleet of his at the bottom of the Adriatic? Or was his armies elsewhere? Actually, where on earth was Mark Antony actually? You know what, don't mind that. Iberia is much more interesting. The Gauls were making a move for Numantia, and perhaps we could use this as a distraction and sneak past their patrols. So we tried to, letting Agrippa besiege Catuba, so he and the Victrix Legion could keep the army garrisoned inside Catuba from hunting the smaller legion we had. However, all this did was set the Victrix Legion in a terrible position against twice the odds. But retreating now would be certain death for our other army, and thus Agrippa had no choice but to fight, if not win, at least do enough damage to deter a future attack. Running up this hill was particularly challenging considering our heavy armor, but if we could bring down the enemy vanguard before their core unit showed up, a chance at victory was at hand. And so it was we sent our cavalry in behind enemy lines despite the risk of hostile units appearing out of the fog of war and enveloping us. It was a calculated risk that along with our ranged barrages demolished their morale. Just in time we managed to regroup before the main army attack. Some would think fatigue would be the end of our troops, but by this point Agrippa now had more men, not to forget superior equipment that sealed the deal. We cut down as many as we could before they went back in behind their walls. Shortly thereafter, our second army arrived unarmed to help bring down Catuba. Our offensive was causing a chain reaction. Lepidus now had clear evidence that splitting up his armies to hold their own separate regions made them vulnerable. Therefore, he told his men to fall back, de facto abandoning central Iberia, hoping to consolidate his troops in the west. This also meant, now that our 2 legions had linked up like we always wanted, we couldn't move away from Catuba without our shadow, that being Lepidus' united armies, consuming the lands we leave behind. A 3rd legion was to be raised, and help in these matters. The strategic understanding that Lepidus made clear he had was something the Egyptians were yet to do. Octavian marched out to confront their raiding vanguard, using his Libyan cavalry to harass the Egyptian pikemen so they couldn't form a linear front. A massive gap opened up in the central part of the formation. Elite Roman legionnaires rushed through, paving the way for our javelin men to do the same. They would take position right behind the Egyptian pike units and started to lay bets on who would neutralize the most enemies. Our men with the gladius, however, had no luxury for fun. Their lives were on the line against the foes with 3 times the killing range. This was why it was so important for our troops to be this nimble and maneuverable compared to the enemy. Another decisive victory under the belt of Octavian, who continued to prove he was more capable of leading armies without advice from Agrippa, like the rumors proclaimed. In retaliation to this victory, the Egyptians sent almost 7,000 men to confront our lesser fleet. At last they were willing to fight. But although transports were no real match against a proper navy, their sheer numbers would eventually overwhelm our fleet. As I'm not willing to trade lives, without purpose mind you, the fleet was forced to make do with Egyptian tactics. It would sail for Carthage and build up its power there. Way in the north, our most peaceful front was beginning to move. The Marcomanni horde had been driven to abandon their lands by a rivaling tribe and thus began pushing towards the Alps. This was a direct threat to Latium and Rome herself. Surely you understand we couldn't let this slide. Our northern patrol, led by a man called Gemellus, thus hired numerous mercenaries and marched deeper into the forest. Here he was confronted by the Germans, whose barbarian lifestyle had imprinted itself into their warriors, or farmers you could call them. None of them actually wore any professional armor or showed any form of discipline. Despite this being by far our weakest legion, it hammered the Germanic horde into the dirt. With this victory, Gemellus grew cocky and began seeing an opportunity for gravitas in Germania. After all, if they were this weak, why not prepare a raiding party to loot and pillage the land beyond the Rhine? He would run back to Vesontio and begin establishing a field of Mars, so he could raise a proper legion and take on a task far more difficult than he would imagine. Over in Iberia, despite Lepidus' wishes for a united army, the Avernian threat somehow convinced him to back down from this plan. It was a lose-lose situation for him: abandon his people and face major political backlash, or extend his already limited defenses. Maybe he suspected that because we were mustering a third army, we wouldn't attack until it was ready. Oh, how wrong he was. Agrippa and the Victrix Legion carved their way through their barricades and effectively split up Lepidus' lands with armies isolated on either side. The ones near Olisipo were by far the strongest and also bold enough to take control of the only bridge crossing this river in the south. Agrippa decided to put up patrols in the surrounding hills and keep the status quo. For now. I mean, we are better off talking about Egypt anyway. With the fleet gone to be built, the rulers of the Nile sent forth their swarm of crocodiles. The transports at sea threatened an attack on Cyrene, while 2 armies were roaming that same land already. One of them being led by Cleopatra herself. By the looks of the dust clouds, she appeared to move towards our provinces. Although stopping her was important, Cyrene couldn't simply be abandoned, discarded like some vines. Octavian had to wait it out, and then... Not sure whether this was good or so much worse, but Cleopatra suddenly turned her army north and fortified herself so she could call for aid from the nearby army if attacked. Octavian was in danger again. Luckily, the fleet just returned, meaning the harbor would be safe if the transports actually attacked. It was then Octavian discovered how Cleopatra's army actually wasn't willing to reinforce this other army, typical of that snake. Meaning with a swift attack to then immediately fall back, we would turn this otherwise damning threat into something manageable at least. The Adriatic fleet too was called down just in case, but changed course after chasing one of Mark Antony's fleets and then discovering how Athens, Antony's base of operations, was completely vulnerable. ripe for a blockade.
Get the blockade set up!
I mean, the one fleet we did have was more than capable of dealing with the transports again, now that it had been strengthened and as they had drifted too far away from one another. You know, divide and conquer things. Without her swarm of armies to help her, Cleopatra reverted back to invading our exposed provinces. Octavian went on the hunt, challenging her to a confrontation on the field. This she denied, seizing Euphrantia to take refuge amongst civilians. What a shameless leader of a nation! However, now she had nowhere to hide.